Hello, I'm back reading one of my favourite childhood books, um, The Silver Crown by Robert O'Brien. Absolutely love this book. And I think I know I'd got to chapter 6. I'd finished chapter 6 and now we're on chapter 7, which is called Otto the Wrecker. And there's a little asterisk there saying, one who causes shipwreck, especially for purposes of plunder, by showing luring lights or false signals. And that's reference to the Oxford English Dictionary. So get yourself comfortable and I shall begin. Ellen was awakened by a flock of crows sitting in a circle in a treetop high above her. They were talking. From having lived many years in the country, Ellen knew that crows can say a great deal more than just caw. That raucous cry, in fact, is only a warning signal. It means watch out, or, in a different tone, help. But left to themselves on a quiet morning, crows will conduct whole conversations in quiet voices, talking one at a time. And that is what they were doing now. And Ellen thought she could even distinguish the leader crow, setting forth the plans for the day. Anyway, it was a gentle way to wake up, and when Ellen moved, and a squirrel scurried up a tree a few feet away, darting around to the back side of the trunk to hide from her. Like most squirrels, he did not know how long his tail was, and left it sticking out, so she was able to watch that much of him all the way up until he vanished into the thick green pine needles. Above the needles the sun was shining, but down at the bottom of the forest only a few bright spears of light found their way, moving like slow searchlights around the ground. As the sun rose higher, Ellen sat up. She was terribly thirsty. She was also hungry, but in a battle between thirst and hunger, thirst always wins. Her forehead was bruised where she had bumped the dashboard, and the ankle Mr. Gates had stepped on was sore and swollen a little. But mainly she was thirsty. Somewhere in this wood, she thought, there must be a brook, and suddenly the idea of a brook with cold water running over stones seemed like the most delicious thought she had ever had. It made her twice as thirsty as before, but it also occurred to her that a surer way to find water might be to find a highway again, because somewhere along the roadside, sooner or later, there would be a house where she could knock on the door and ask for a drink. She was sure she could find the road. Since in leaving it she had run uphill all the way, to find it she had merely to walk downhill. So she set off, keeping a sharp eye out for a brook and another for Mr. Gates, though for some reason she felt quite certain he really was gone. She walked for perhaps 10 minutes, limping slightly, thinking about Mr. Gates. When she had seen the gun and the green hood, she had known immediately that he was the one who had shot the shop manager and poor Officer Drogue. There was, she realised now, something about the way he moved that should have reminded her of the murderer immediately, but she had been so eager to get the lift to Kentucky that she had not paid attention. She wondered, too, about his knowing Aunt Sarah's name. Perhaps she had told him, but she did not think so. And then there was that strange thing Officer Drogue had said before he ran off. Another green hood. It all added up to a puzzle she could not solve. She saw no brook, and the road seemed further away than she had thought. But suddenly, right in front of her, she saw something she recognised. It was not the road, but it was from the road. It was a stack of brown cardboard cartons, piled neatly behind a very large tree trunk. And behind another tree trunk, nearby, stood another stack. They were, she was quite sure, some of the same cartons that had fallen out of the wrecked truck the night before. There must have been 10 or more of them piled up. But how had they got here? She walked over to one of the stacks and looked at the top carton. Stencilled in black letters on one end were the words, "Blue Ridge Apple Juice, 1 dozen." Apple juice. She loved it. And right now she felt she could drink the whole box. She was pulling the carton off the pile when the thought struck her. It's not my apple juice. It belongs to somebody. I can't just take it. And then she thought, I'll drink just 1 bottle and I'll wait here. When the owner comes, I'll pay him from it for my money. If the owner did not come soon, she could simply leave a quarter on top of the carton. That would surely be enough for 1 bottle. She lifted the heavy box to the ground, pulled the top open and took out a bottle. Sure enough, there was the juice, gurgling deliciously inside the brown glass. But how was she to get the top off without a bottle opener? She picked up a stick and prized at it, but the stick broke. She stood up and looked around for a better tool. A pointed rock, maybe. Not 6 feet away, a small boy stood, barefooted, watching her with wary brown eyes. In his hand he held a very large hunting knife. He held it out to her politely, handle first. He said, "Here, open it with this." "Is it yours?" "Yes, that is, it fell off a truck. When they hauled the truck away this morning, they left those boxes. But you can have some." "Why didn't they take them?" "I don't know. I suppose they were in the ditch where they couldn't see them." His eyes looked away. "They were in a hurry to move the truck." Ellen took the knife and pried the top loose. She drained half the bottle without stopping. "Gee," said the boy, "you must be thirsty." "I am. I've been thirsty ever since yesterday." "Do you want some water? Water's better when you're thirsty." "I know. I couldn't find any." "I know where there's some." "Where?" "Right up here. Come on." He led the way, and in a few steps, just out of sight of the boxes, they came to a large, flat-topped boulder, over the top of which trickled the clearest, cleanest, coldest-looking spring water in the world. It ran down the side of the rock into a tiny pool, from which someone had raked away the pine needles, leaving a sparkling bed of rock and sand. She lay down and drank the icy water until she felt dizzy. "You don't want to drink too fast when you're thirsty," the boy warned. "I know, I'll stop now. What's your name?" "Otto. There was a man up on the hill last night chasing somebody." "I know. He was chasing me. Did you hear him?" "No, I was asleep in bed. I saw his tracks. I saw yours too." "You were here all night?" He really did not mean it as a question. He knew. "Where did the man go?" "He drove away, I think. At least I heard his car." "That's what I thought. I saw where he ran back to the road. He fell down a lot." He certainly seemed to know a great deal considering how small he was. He was dressed in worn-out grey trousers, ragged at the ankles, patched at the knees, and a faded cotton flannel shirt, which had once been blue plaid. His coal-black hair was cut straight all round, but except for his bare feet, which were stained brown, he looked clean and rather nice. Ellen liked him. "How old are you?" she asked. He looked embarrassed. "About 8.5, I think." "You mean you don't know?" Ellen asked in amazement. "Well, not exactly. My mother says I was born in the autumn. She thinks maybe October, but she can't remember for sure. She's so old, she forgets a lot of things." "But your birthday?" Oh, I have birthdays all right. Well, when is it? When we get stuff for a birthday cake in the autumn. Then we have my birthday, he said patiently, as if he were explaining something simple to a simpleton. He clearly disliked the whole subject, so he changed it. What's your name? Ellen Carroll. How old are you? 10. My birthday was yesterday. She started to tell him about the crown, then decided against it, but felt her handbag to make sure it was still there. It was. What's in the handbag? Oh, things. Doesn't your father know when your birthday is? Ellen changed the subject back again. I don't have a father. Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen said. Did he die? No, he just left. We didn't care. We didn't like him anyway. We don't want him back. He stood up. I've got to take these boxes up to my house. All of them? Well, not all at once, patiently again. I carry one at a time. Where's your house? Up there, he pointed. About a mile. It takes all day to get a bunch like this up there. I got 11 this time. He had an afterthought. Are you lost? No, at least not really. But the truth was, Ellen realised for the first time she was lost. That is, I don't know where I am. Then you're lost. That's what being lost is. He added, Look, you better come with me. You can talk to my mother. When Ellen thought about it, she realised that she had little choice. She had lost her food and her road maps. She had no idea how far Mr. Gates had driven her, nor even really whether he had gone towards Kentucky at all. Otto's mother, being a grown-up, would know where she was and in which direction Kentucky lay. All right, I'll carry one of the boxes, she said. They set out. Alan carried the carton of apple juice. Otto lifted another to his shoulder. It said, dried split peas, £2, 1 dozen. Both boxes were heavy, but Otto carried his lightly. His small shoulders were straight and sturdy. But Ellen had trouble. In 100 yards or so, the hard cardboard surface of the carton had found a knuckle in her shoulder bone and was rasping it unbearably. She put it down, switched it to the other shoulder, and then trotted through the trees to catch up with Otto, who had not paused. In a few minutes, the same thing happened to the other shoulder. Then she tried carrying it like a baby in both arms, and that was better, except that, unlike a baby, it was slippery and kept sliding down. Also, the extra weight made her sore ankle hurt. Finally, out of breath, she called, Can we stop and rest a minute? Otto stopped. To his credit, he was not scornful, but only slightly superior and even a little sympathetic. Girls aren't very strong, he said, but mainly you aren't used to it. Some of the stuff I carry up is twice this heavy. Once I got an armchair. That was hard. Ellen could imagine him, like an ant with a watermelon seed, toiling an armchair up the hill. I don't understand, she said, panting as she sank to the ground. Have other trucks crashed here, too, before last night? All the time. One every 3-4 months, sometimes more. There's a bad gradient, the bend that hides it. But that's so dangerous. Why don't they fix it? It's really not too dangerous. Nobody ever got hurt yet. They all do the same thing. Front of the cab goes in the ditch. Front of the trailer goes in the air. Stuff falls out of the back. Driver gets out and walks for help. But suppose the driver gets hurt? They never do. But he might. Then I suppose I'd have to go for help. What about the boxes? Well, what about them? Do they always fall in the ditch? Otto looked evasive again. Well, usually, but it's not always boxes. One time it was live chickens. In those wire cages. We still have some chickens left from that one. One time it was light bulbs, hundreds and hundreds of them. We couldn't use them because we've got no electricity. Most of they broke anyway. There was glass all over the road. But is it all right? I mean, are you allowed to just take them like this? Otto's face turned dark red as if Ellen had hit him. He was suddenly furious. I've got to take them. I've got to. My mother is old and she hardly has any money. When I get bigger, I can earn money, but I can't now. And in the winter, I have to go to school. Anyway, if no trucks crash, we don't have anything to eat. He stood up. Come on, I've got to get this home. I'm sorry, Ellen said. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I think you're right, I really do. But Otto's anger had already gone. He helped her lift the carton of apple juice, then shouldered his own. Come on, he said again. It's only a little way more. And in a few minutes they came to a dirt road, a wagon track leading up the hill from the highway. They rounded a bend into a clearing, and there Ellen saw a small, pretty white house surrounded by gardens, both flower and vegetable. In one of them, a tall woman in a long grey dress was working with a hoe. So that was chapter 7. So I'm going to continue on now into chapter 8, which is just titled Richard. Otto's mother, whose name was Mrs. Fitzpatrick, welcomed Ellen pleasantly and without any particular surprise, as if Otto was there always bringing things home from the forest. And this time it was a girl. Otto said, Mother, she was lost in the woods. A man chased her last night, and she doesn't even know where she is. Otto, said his mother, putting down her hoe and peering at Ellen. The girl is not only lost, she is exhausted, frightened, hungry, lonely, and she has been through a disaster. And who knows what more? Her ankle is swollen, and her carrying a heavy box like that. Put it down, child. And Ellen did. Now, dear, come into the house, and we'll get you some breakfast. We'll have sausage and eggs and biscuits, and how about some nice fresh peaches with powdered sugar on them? This sounded so good to Ellen that it made her head spin, and she stumbled as she followed Mrs. Fitzpatrick into the house. Mrs. Fitzpatrick seemed to Ellen to be too old to be the mother of a young boy like Otto. She looked more like a grandmother. Her face was brown and gnarled and wrinkled, like a pumpkin-sized walnut. She was tall. Her hair was pure grey, and despite her years, she stood as straight as the hoe handle. Her dress was threadbare, but elegantly simple. It reached all the way to her ankles and looked as if she had made it herself. She could cook. The sausage was the tenderest, spiciest, sweetest, and meatiest Ellen had ever tasted. The eggs, before they were cooked, were still warm from the hen. The biscuits were brown and white, crispy, soft, crumbly, and crunchy, all at the same time. Ellen ate 3 eggs, 4 pieces of sausage, 5 biscuits, they were small, and a big bowl of sliced peaches with sugar on them. After she had eaten all she could, Mrs. Fitzpatrick took her hand and led her to a small, cheerful room at the back of the house. It had a sunny window looking out on a peach tree, a pretty rocking chair, and a bed with a plain blue cotton coverlet. We've not used this room for a long time, said Mrs. Fitzpatrick. It is your room now for as long as you need it. I know you have had a terrible and sad time, and you had very little sleep last night, for your face looks lost and desperate, and your eyes have black shadows under them as big as cucumbers. You must sleep, or you will be ill. So Ellen lay down on the bed, with her shoes off and her head on the pillow, and Mrs. Fitzpatrick sat for a moment beside her, and looked at her with a most kindly and compassionate expression. Poor little Ellen, she said, I do not know that your trouble is over, but you are safe here, for a time at least. And she put her gnarled, strong hand on Ellen's head and stroked her hair. Then she left, closing the door behind her. Ellen had, for the past 24 hours and more, a well in her throat and a wrench in her stomach, which since she was of royal blood, she had held back by clamping her chin and holding it up high. But now that small touch on her hair pressed her chin down, and the well burst, and the Queen sobbed a huge sob, and then cried hard and bitterly at last. Luckily there was no one there to see, since Mrs. Fitzpatrick had left the room. What is happening to me? My house burned, my family are all killed, Officer Droge is killed, Mr. Gates is a murderer and chased me through the woods. But he did not even know me, except somehow maybe he did, since he knew Aunt Sarah's name. And he acted so strange, and at the end really crazy. She remembered Mr. Gates's high, terrified wail as he ran back down to the car, crashing and falling. Ellen felt as if she were being blown along with no control over her direction by some irresistible, angry hurricane, yet a personal kind of hurricane nonetheless, designed especially for her, and one which knew where it was going, though she did not. With this horrifying thought she fell asleep, and oddly enough, did not dream at all. When she woke up, the afternoon sun was shining in the window. She put her shoes back on, shaking some pine needles out of them first, and went to the door. She could not open it. It was locked. Why? She shook the knob, knocked, and listened. There was no sound in the house. Then quickly she dashed to the window. Directly outside sat Otto, under the peach tree, on one of the cartons from the trunk. He saw her at the window and made a motion for her to open it. She did. Shh, he whispered. Don't move. Ellen stayed where she was, wondering. Then Otto whistled. An answering whistle came from the leaves of the peach tree. Richard, said Otto. Richard, said the tree in a squawky voice. Richard, come. Richard, come, said the tree, and a shiny blue-black crow fluttered onto Otto's shoulder. Good Richard, said Otto. Good Richard, squawked the crow. Good Richard, eat. Richard, eat. Richard, eat, eat, eat. Otto took a biscuit from his pocket, crumbled it in his palm, and held it out. The crow gobbled it greedily, murmuring, Richard, eat, in a doughy voice after each bite. Then it flew back into the tree. Ellen was impressed. How did he learn to talk? I taught him. I found him in the woods when he was a baby. He couldn't fly, so I put him in a box in my room. I fed him worms and bread and bugs and berries. He'll eat anything. Can he talk more than that? Sure, he can say a lot of things, and he's still learning. Come on out. I can't, the door's locked. I know, my mother locked it. Come out through the window. Since it was a ground floor window, Ellen scrambled out easily enough and stood beside Otto under the tree. Why did she lock me in? I think she was locking everybody else out, Otto said. She had to go out in the garden. I think she didn't like leaving you alone. Anyway, she told me to watch your window. I wonder why. I don't know. I think because of that man that chased you. But he's gone. But he might come back. How would he know I'm here? I don't know. He might find out. Ellen looked around apprehensively and shivered slightly. Oh, he's not around here now, Otto said. How do you know? He might be hiding in the trees. Richard would know. Crows have terrific eyes, ears too. If any strangers come near here, he makes a terrible squawking noise, and he won't come down out of the tree. I'm a stranger. Yes, but you came with me. He's like a watchdog. Better, he can fly up in the air and see a mile. Gee, Ellen said, feeling relieved. That's smart. There's one thing wrong with him, though. He's no good at night. He just sleeps in the tree, won't fly, won't talk, won't anything. Just then, Richard came fluttering down again, not quite to Otto's shoulder this time, since he was shy of Ellen, but to a low branch. Richard, he said again, Richard, eat! But Otto had no more food in his pockets, so in a moment the crow took off with a whir of wings, heading towards the woods and calling out what sounded to Ellen like, Orta, Orta, Orta. What's he saying? He means water. Come on, I'll show you. And Otto scrambled off after the crow, with Ellen following. They walked. Otto ran ahead, but Ellen still limped, so he slowed and waited for her, uphill, into the woods behind the house. This was not pine forest, but great, wide, branching oak trees, growing just the right distance apart so that each massive trunk seemed to stand in its own house, with its own high ceiling of boughs and leaves. Above and ahead of them, Ellen could glimpse Richard fluttering from branch to branch. He had slowed down for her too. At length she heard ahead of them a gentle soaring, a murmur, then a gurgling, a brook, and then they stepped out onto the bank of a pond. But what a pond! It looked like the enchanted pool in a fairy tale, because it was perfectly round, about the size of a large room, with a curved rock cliff walling it at one end, and a tiny new moon of a sandy beach at the other. Through the sand into the pond bubbled the brook Ellen had heard. She stood staring in delight until Otto, who had been rolling up his pant legs, sprang through the air with a shout and landed ankle deep at the sandy end of the pool. Then he kicked a big splash of water at Ellen, spattering her from head to foot. Don't, said Ellen, covering her face, but she couldn't help laughing. The water felt lovely on her face, and in a minute she had kicked off her shoes and joined Otto in the pond. Can you swim? He asked. A bit, not too well. Be careful then, the other end is deep. How deep? Watch. He picked up from the bank a long, straight branch, twice as tall as he was. Moving from the shallow sandy end where the brook came in, he waded until he was up to his knees, about halfway across. Then, reaching as far forward as he could, he thrust the branch straight down. It disappeared beneath the water without touching the bottom. A moment later it appeared on the surface again, and Otto caught it and threw it back on the bank. You see, it drops off just like a cliff. No bottom from here on to the rock. You could dive off the rock. I do. I wish we had our bathing suits. I don't have a bathing suit, Ellen said. I don't have any clothes beside these. My mother will make you some, Otto said. She can sew anything. She's got whole batches of cloth. From a truck? From a truck, Otto said cheerfully. Watch out! Ellen ducked, as with a piercing shriek Richard dived on them, both from the limb above, and glided like a black jet to a landing on the beach. Oh, said Ellen in sudden alarm. Has he seen someone? No, he's just cross with me. What for? He scared me. Because I'm talking to you. He's jealous? No, he wants a fish. I'll show you. There were schools of small, light brown minnows swimming in the shallow water, chasing their grey shadows across the sand. Otto picked up the same long stick and waded towards the shallow's end near the brook, watching his feet and pushing the stick sideways towards the shore. By doing this, he herded one school of little fish towards the beach. At the last minute, most of them turned around and darted under the stick, around his legs and got away. But a few swam to the edge and beached themselves in an inch of water. Otto leaped over the stick, plunged his hands down, and came up with a wriggling minnow in each fist. Richard, who had been watching all this calmly with a bright black eye, now turned slightly in the sand, balancing himself on his toes, and said, "Eat." He did not fly to Otto's shoulder, and Ellen saw why. Otto, with a careful underhand toss, sent a fish arching and wriggling through the air. With a quick, deft stretch of his neck, Richard caught it in the air and swallowed it in one gulp. The other followed a second later. "That's neat," Ellen said. "But the poor little fish, they don't mind." "How do you know?" "They're too stupid. They don't feel anything." "But how do you know? They might." "Don't you eat fish?" "Well, sometimes, but not much." "You eat bacon? Pigs feel things. They squeal like murder." Ellen was learning that Otto was, among other things, a merciless opponent in an argument. "I've never heard them," she said rather lamely, and she resolved firmly for about 10 seconds never to eat bacon or fish again. So they talked and argued and waded and sat on the sand in the sun until the shadows of the big trees crept across and covered the pool. "We've got to go home," Otto said at last. "I've got to bring in the wood." "The wood?" "For the stove to cook dinner." Ellen did not argue about that. She was hungry, but she had never seen a stove that used wood. And that's the end of that chapter, so I'll stop there for today. I hope you really enjoyed it, and I'll record another chapter or two soon. Lots of love. Bye-bye for now.